بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. أما بعد, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank Him for the ni'mah of Yawm al-Jumu'ah in the blessed month of Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us, to accept our ibadat, our acts of worship, to send peace and salutations upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his family members, his companions, all of those who follow his way until the day of judgment. Amin ya Rabbil Alameen. It's a huge blessing for us that we're coming to the end of the month of Ramadan. This is a month wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showers his mercies upon us. And as Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says in one hadith, display to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the khair and the goodness that you have. So that is what we aim to achieve. That is what we were trying to do throughout this month. We still have 1 or 2 more days left of this beautiful month. So we cannot forget this goal. That we want to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the best that you and I have. Allah knows what is inside us. Sometimes we're unaware. Sometimes we do not know what we possess. And it takes a very difficult situation to bring that out of us. And that is the month of Ramadan. It's not easy. It's not a festival. Ramadan is actually a time of difficulty. And if you notice, our 2 holidays throughout the year, we have Eid al-Fitr, which is going to come up soon, inshallah, and then Eid al-Adha. That is going to come in a few months as well. They're very close together. Both of these holidays for the Muslims, these are our only 2 holidays that we have, the 2 Eids. And Eid means the oft recurring ones. They come again and again. We always say that, subhanAllah, where did the time go? I remember last Eid, now a new Eid has come. So that's what Eid means, it comes over and over. Both of these holidays, they're preceded by times of difficulty. If you look at Eid al-Adha, there is Hajj that precedes it. And for those of us who do not go for Hajj, then the Ayyamul Ashar, the first 10 days is actually Sunnah, Mustahab, recommended by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to fast, to do various acts of worship in those 10 days. So it's 1/3 of Ramadan, if you will. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He lets us know, and some say this is the tafsir of Wal Fajr wa Layalin Ashar. The 10 nights, some say, is referring to the 10 nights of before Eid al-Adha. So that is a time of struggle as well. And before Eid al-Fitr, we have a whole month. That is Ramadan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to have a good time, festivities, a time of celebration, only after we've gone through the crucible of difficulty. When we put ourselves through strenuous ibadah and working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why the poet, he says, لَيْسَ الْعِيدْ لِمَنْ لَبِسَ الْجَدِيدِ إِنَّمَا الْعِيدْ لِمَنْ طَاعَتُهُ تَزِيدُ. Eid is not for the person who wears new clothes. That's not Eid. Eid is for the person whose ibadah and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has grown. That is the true Eid. If someone has achieved that, irrespective of which Eid, both of them are preceded by a time of ibadah, then they truly got the fruits of Eid. That is the individual who can truly rejoice and celebrate. So this is a time where we actually get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is obvious to every one of us, how each one of us, alhamdulillah, with the tawfiq and the capability granted to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are waking at times that sometimes we don't wake up at this time. We find a collective strength within the ummah to wake up at suhoor time. Most people, they definitely don't miss suhoor. They have something to eat. They fast throughout the day. You have work, school, etc. You're not eating, drinking, yet you're persevering throughout the day. You're avoiding sin. You're avoiding argumentation. You're avoiding engaging in haram. You obey Allah in the sense that you know you want to eat and drink. You may want to fulfill your desires. You know you can't do that. Then the iftar time comes, and this is Allah's gift to us. Very soon after, we come for Salatul Taraweeh, and you have extra 20 rak'ahs, each rak'ah being much, much longer than what you and I are used to in terms of our fard prayers. So, and having the strength to do this, subhanAllah, whereas many of us are not acquainted with any kind of optional worship outside the month of Ramadan. Thereafter, sitting in different halaqat, different programs, etc. This only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has put this on our shoulders. He wants to see which one of us can obey Him at this time. And the more you obey, the closer you get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah and many other scholars have talked about various levels of fasting. And they usually mention 3 different levels of fasting. They say the first level of fasting is for every single Muslim. Every single Muslim must fulfill the first level of fasting, which is the bare minimum, abstaining from food, drink, and relations. This everyone has to do, and if you don't do it, your fast is going to break. The second level of fasting is, along with the first part, staying away from food, drink, and relations, one also stays away. They're keen on staying away from sin. They make this their goal. I don't want to say anything impermissible. I don't want to slander anyone. I don't want to speak badly about someone behind their back. I don't want to engage in gossip. I don't want to look at what is haram, what Allah has forbidden for me. I don't want to hear and listen to what is haram. Everything is being checked. There's a constant fear. Am I going to slip? Am I going to make a mistake? Am I going to lose the reward of the fast? As Rasulullah ﷺ has informed us, we actually can be doing the technical fast but not getting the fruit of the fast itself. A person may be engaging in ghiba, slander, gossip, and Nabi ﷺ says, رُبَّ الصَّائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ صِيَامِهِ إِلَّا الْجُوعِ. There's so many people that are fasting, but what they get from the fast is basically hunger, nothing else. And the third level of fasting, the highest level of fasting, is also with the first 2, staying away from food, drink, and relations, staying away from sin. But the third and highest level is to stay away from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be cognizant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times, to detach from the dunya itself. And this is a very hard thing to do. And this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was doing in his fasts. Also, before he became a prophet, when he was in the cave, he detached himself from the dunya. Before he received the first revelation from Jibreel, he was in the cave, Ghar Hira, about a mile away from Mecca. He detached himself from the entirety of creation. Now, this was not the habit of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to completely detach at all times. He was very much engaged with his community. He would take part of, the politics and things of that nature. He was a businessman. However, he did have a time where he preferred solitude. And this is the highest level of fasting, and this is what those who are going into the i'tikaf, what they seek. They are seeking to cut away from the dunya and to attach themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly tells us in the Quran, the closer you and I go towards the dunya, the farther we get from Allah. And the closer we get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the farther we get from the dunya. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't engage with the dunya at all. We adopt a middle path, where 5 times a day we cut off from the dunya and we come and we perform salah. We fast, and in those time periods we cut off from the dunya. When we're given zakat, when we are going for hajj, etc., these are times where we cut off from the dunya and we connect more to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there are other times where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually commands us to go and get your rizq and sustenance and seek it out. وَبَتَغُوا مِن فَضْلِ اللَّهِ, as Allah says. Go seek out the rizq and sustenance of Allah. And scholars even state, when you do this with the correct intention, even seeking wealth and the rizq and the dunya becomes ibadah of Allah itself. So these are the 3 levels of fasting, and they also correspond to the 3 levels of our spiritual development. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in 3 different places the development of the nafs. And the nafs can be considered our lower self, our passions, our inner desires. A person has the aql, the rationality. A person has their ruh, the spirituality. And a person has their nafs. And the nafs is that inner voice that you and I have. The desire to do certain things. And you will find that depending on where you are as an individual, how close or how far you are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your desires will be different. There are some people out there who have desires to do sin constantly. I'm not saying I'm not saying that people don't have desire for sin, but there are some people who their nafs and their inner self always whispers to them to commit sin. Not really telling them to do any good. There's no desire to do good. There are some people out there whose nafs is in the middle. Sometimes they're pulled towards sin. They have this strong agitation within themselves. They want to commit sin. And sometimes towards khair and goodness. They want to perform salah. They want to give in charity. They want to help others. And then there's a third category who's always seeking the closeness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who don't really desire sin. It may occur, and then they seek Allah's forgiveness for it. But the standard for them are positive thoughts, positivity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives these three things, these three levels, names in the Quran. In Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, Inna nafsa la ammaratun bisu. The nafs, the self, the individual self, the inner self, your subconscious being, it commands and it incites towards evil. And this is an attribute of the nafs that Yusuf alayhi salam was talking about. So this is what scholars state is the lowest level, where a person, their standard is to think about sin, is to want to fulfill that sin. They may be in salah and they're thinking about sin. They may be outside of salah thinking about sin. 24/7 their mind revolves and rotates around disobedience. It's not a good state to be in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Qiyamah, He mentions the second level of progression. And how does one go from one level to the next? Inshallah, I will tell you how that happens. The second level that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, He says, وَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ. I take an oath by the reproaching self. So the first self that was mentioned in Surah Yusuf is the one that incites towards evil. That's its salient trait and feature. The second one is lawama. And lawama means the one that censors itself, that continuously blames itself. This is where many of us find ourselves. We want to do good. Theoretically speaking, we all want to do good. We all had aspirations for this month. Realistically speaking, we may not have met those goals. We may have fallen into sin. And that is okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened the doors for tawbah. However, when those sins were committed, we felt something. When a sin is committed, we feel grief. We feel regret after the sin. We say to ourselves, why did this happen? Why did I do this? How could I have let that happen? And we feel bad about that. That is the reproaching self, which is much higher than the lowest version. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Fajr, He talks about the highest level. Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna. O contented soul. The contented soul, the one that has reached tranquility and happiness and peace. What is that soul? That is the one that is always thinking about how to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How it can go towards productivity. How it can help other people. How it can cause a positive change in the world. These are the three different levels that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of regarding our nafs. So you have the one that continuously tells you to do evil, the one that feels bad when evil is done, and the one that's its standard has now become doing good actions. The question is, how does one develop from one level to the next? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran in Surah Al-Fatir, He says regarding these three groups, ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا. We have given this book the holy text and the wahi to a group of people. We have made them inheritors of this. فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. Among this group of people who have inherited the wahi, that's you and I, we have inherited the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is why this ummah is so special, is because we inherited this last testament from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, among this group of people, there are those who wrong themselves. This is their salient feature. ظَالِمْ لِنَفْسِهِ. Always harming themselves. How do you and I harm ourselves? Via sin. We sin, and we do not harm Allah in the least, we harm ourselves. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ. There are people in the middle. Muqtasid, they're not on the upper echelons, they're not on the lower level either. وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And then there are the upper echelons, the highest tier of the people who have inherited the book. They are continuously doing good. They're always seeking, how can I get better? How can I apply the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can I learn more, practice more, preach more? So these three groups, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through Islam itself, through the fara'id, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made compulsory upon us, He is giving us the remedy, how you can go from one stage to the next. And that is what Ramadan is about. It's a time of a great amount of difficulty that you undergo so that you may, whatever level you're at, if you're at nafs lawama, or if you're at nafs ammara, to get from there, the lowest level, to get to the second reproaching self, or if you're at the reproaching self, to get from there to the contented self. This is what Ramadan is about. When you struggle, when you fight against your desires. Each one of us wants to drink something right now. Each one of us probably wants to eat something right now. Each one of us wants to do many different things that we can't do in this blessed month. By continuously putting ourselves through this difficulty, doing what you don't want, sacrificing your desires for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, you are able to progress from one level to the next. And the whole goal is you retain this after the month of Ramadan. You start out in Ramadan wherever you are. Through the actions in Ramadan, if done correctly, you progress to the next level. And inshallah, you retain that level. No one is saying the greatest ones are the ones who even progress throughout the year. But retain what you have gotten throughout the month of Ramadan. Wait for the next Ramadan, and inshallah, you progress even further. And if we do this and we don't ruin what we have attained in this blessed month, then we are able to grow. However, if you and I, after Eid, we say, okay, Ramadan is over, I was fasting so much, I'm not going to fast anymore till next Ramadan. I was standing in Taraweeh and various types of prayers, I'm not going to do that anymore. No extra prayers for me. Maybe the 5 times salah, maybe not. The sadaqat that I was giving, the charities, not going to give anything till next Ramadan. That's going to ruin what you and I have laid the foundation of. You want to keep that going, inshallah, so that you can progress further and get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam even tells us that achieving the goal of Ramadan. And what is the goal of Ramadan that I've been talking about? Developing further. Going from a state of sin to a state of recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To a state where you have, instead of a selfish mindset, you develop a mindset that Allah is first and foremost. When you're at the base level, your mind is a little bit selfish. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Jathiyah, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. Have you not seen the individual who has taken their own desires as their God? They worship their own desires. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has led them astray despite them having the correct knowledge. Who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about here? Who takes their own desires as their God? Someone at the lowest level in terms of their spiritual development. What is a God? What is an ilah? Ilah is a ma'bud, someone you worship. And what is worship? It's adoration, it's obedience. Who deserves our obedience? We as Muslims, we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only being who deserves our obedience. That's what we say with our mouth. However, what about our actions? do our actions reflect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that deserves my obedience? Or is it the other way around, that I have turned my own desires the object of my own obedience? If so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, this person has taken their hawa, their own desires, to be their God. Because they have put all of their obedience in their own desires. They follow themselves, they worship themselves. And that is worship at its core. Obedience and adoration. So how do we progress from that selfish mindset that I only want to serve myself, to getting to the higher upper echelons of me wanting to serve Allah and His creation? That is the purpose of Ramadan. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this gift. He puts you through all of these tests, these difficulties. Fast throughout the day, stand throughout the night, don't do what you want, spend out of what Allah has given you for those who have less. All of these actions are quite difficult, and we do it to a high degree in this blessed month so that we may leave this month in a very beautiful state. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that Jibreel alayhi salam came to him, and he was standing on the pulpit. He was on the minbar, on the third step. So the Sahaba were watching. He was giving a speech. Suddenly, he stops talking and he's listening. The Sahaba can't hear anything. So he says, Ameen, and then he descends one of the steps. And then he listens again. He says, Ameen, and then he descends a third step. And then he says, Ameen, a third time. And the Sahaba were confused. Why is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying this? So he told them that at that time, Jibreel alayhi salam came to me and he was making dua. So I was saying Ameen to the dua of Jibreel alayhi salam. A very unique situation where an angel is making dua, and the greatest angel and the greatest human being is saying Ameen to those duas. The three duas that were made at each level. The first one, Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, destruction and sadness be on the individual who finds his parents alive at old age. He has his parents. He is able to serve them, but he does not, and they pass away. And because of that, he has failed to gain Jannah. He didn't serve his parents. He didn't treat them well while they were alive. Then they died. Now his opportunity is gone. The second step, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Ameen. The dua of Jibreel alayhi salam was, sadness and destruction be on that individual who finds the month of Ramadan, experiences this blessed month, and fails to get the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, Ameen. And the third step, Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, sadness and destruction be on the individual who hears the name Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and fails to say sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Ameen to that. If you look at all three, it's a very intelligent dua from Jibreel alayhi salam. They all have a connecting factor. What connects all three of these duas? A great opportunity that is missed. Person has parents that are alive. This is an excellent opportunity for you to get Jannah. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, Allah's pleasure lies in your father's pleasure. And he says, Jannah is beneath your mother's feet. If they die, you've lost a huge opportunity. It's as if one of the gates of Jannah has closed in front of your face. Huge opportunity lost. And the other one where he says, if someone hears Muhammad, this name, and he doesn't say sallallahu alayhi wasallam, lost opportunity. You would have gotten so much reward if you just sent salutations upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And one hadith Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, anytime someone sends a salutation, a dua to me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them 10 salutations. So imagine you just saying sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you 10 times that. Allah is giving it to you. Missed opportunity. And the third one, sadness and destruction beyond the person who experiences Ramadan and was not forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why were they not forgiven? Huge opportunity that was lost. They were not forgiven because they did not do the actions of Ramadan. They didn't fast in the daytime. They didn't stand at night. This is, inshallah, what we want to do, what we want to fulfill in this blessed month, so we can walk out of this month with a lot of khair and goodness. I want to leave you with a parable that I heard from one of our teachers. And this is the parable of Ramadan. He says, this is the purpose of Ramadan. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, fasting has been made compulsory on you so that you may have taqwa. So this is where He's drawing the parable from. Our teacher told us that there was a lumberjack, a man who cuts trees for a living. He got a new job with a contractor to cut several trees, and he does it the classic way. He has an axe. So he brings his axe and he starts his first day of his job. He cuts down several trees. Let's say he cuts down 10 trees. He's happy with it. He gets his wages. He goes home. As he starts to progress, he starts seeing that his numbers slowly go up. He's now next week cutting 12 trees. The week after that, 14, 15, 16 trees. He's getting better and better. His stats are going up. However, after a few months, he starts to notice that his stats are going down. It's no longer 20 trees, 15, no longer 15, 10. And then he dips below his original amount. He's starting to get worried. I'm putting in more effort, but I'm getting less out. What's happening? Then his boss finally comes to him one day and notices his numbers are very, very low. And he says to him, what's happening? You used to be a great worker. You started out, I understand you didn't really know how to do it, and then your numbers went up. Now your numbers are so low. What's the problem? So he says, I don't know what the problem is. I'm working much harder than I was before. So the boss says to him, can I see your axe? So he brings his axe forth, and it's dull. There's nicks in it. The axe is basically completely, it can't cut anything anymore. So the boss says, when's the last time you sharpened your axe? He says, I don't sharpen my axe. So what's wrong with you? Why aren't you sharpening your axe? You have to sharpen this thing, and then you'll be able to cut. So then the boss shows him with a whetstone how to sharpen his axe. The next day he goes and he cuts many more trees than he's ever done before. So this is the example that our teacher gave regarding Ramadan. How does this fit? The purpose of Ramadan is to gain the quality of taqwa, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That has to be our goal. During the year, throughout our interactions with the dunya, our sins, all of these different things, it weakens your taqwa. If you do not have a means to strengthen that taqwa again, to rejuvenate what you had, your a'mal, your good deeds are going to go down. And that is what Ramadan is. It is a time for you to boost that taqwa, to sharpen that axe again, so that throughout the year you have fuel to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the spirit of Ramadan, to take us from one level of progression to the next, to give us tawfiq to, proverbially sharpen our axe and get closer to Him. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.